This is Doth Nihilus, and welcome to the Abyss. Tonight's episode is going to be about Thelema and politics, and how politics is the nature of politics in Thelema, and how that translates. And these are just my opinions. I am not the Thelemic Pope, so do not take my words as gospel truth. They are just my opinions. You can disagree with them as much as you want. So with that disclaimer, let's get on to the point of the episode. To start off with, the main tenet of Thelema is "do what thou wilt" should be the whole of the law. And most people would assume that, at least the uninitiated, would assume that means do whatever you want. So for them, when it comes to politics, they would assume that Thelemites are false. But that said, could you be a Thelemite and be a liberal? Could you be a Thelemite and be a conservative? Could you be a Thelemite and be, whatever political persuasion? And the answer is yes. Following Crowley's will, it's not about following anyone's opinions or beliefs aside from your own values. Now, there's Thelemites that are inherently apolitical, that they don't really talk about politics. They're not very engaged with that subject. Sorry, I'm having connection issues. Who separate their spiritual beliefs and practices from their political beliefs. And while I believe that that's a valid approach as anyone who ties their political beliefs to their spiritual beliefs, I think that Thelemites should not be riding the fence on issues. In my opinion, I don't think Thelemites should be riding the issues, because, to quote Howard Zinn, you can't remain neutral on a moving train. And if you're not using your voice to address issues, then you are giving your voice and enabling the voice of the opposition. And I know that might not necessarily be a very well-received take, but that's how I see it. If you are going to be apolitical, you are merely giving your voice to the opposition and enabling said opposition. But does that necessarily mean that Thelemites who are political that their politics should inform their Thelema, or should their Thelema inform their politics? And I say the latter is true. That their Thelema should inform their politics, and that they should base their politics off of the law of Thelema. And one of the documents that a lot of people cite as being the basis of their political values in Thelema is Liber Oz. And everyone, and you can easily find the document Liber Oz online. But it basically states, it's basically Crowley's rights of man. Every man has the right to live by their own law, which means, at least my interpretation, means that they have the right to live by their own moral values. And that no one has the right to impose their values or their beliefs or anything else on other people. That includes physical things like assault or rape or murder. Those kind of things. Those are seen, and even Crowley in his writings specifically dictates that to infringe or impose or assault someone is a violation of the law of Thelema. And that includes theft, according to Crowley. The question that I pose to the Thelemic community is that while freedom, people should be free to do what they want so long as they don't hurt anyone else. I also think, and I'm going to quote Jack Parsons here, that, as he says, freedom is a double-edged sword. That that one side of the edge is about freedom and the other side of the edge is about responsibility. And I think that just focusing on Liber Oz as being your set of your justification for your political views is very limiting, because if you take into account articles like On Duty, where Crowley talks about the more responsibility side of the role of Thelema within the role of Thelemites within the Thelemic community, and you apply that to a much more broader political spectrum, I believe that Liber Oz and Crowley's article on Duty are reflective of the need that freedom comes with responsibility, and that political stances have not just a moral reflection, but also a community reflection, and that you can't separate that. And a lot of people want to say that spiritual practice shouldn't be inherently political, and I would disagree with that, because I believe that our spiritual beliefs are reflective of our moral values, and our moral values are what we base our political stances on. And so you can't really separate spiritual belief or beliefs in general, regardless if they're spiritual or not. You cannot separate your beliefs and values from your political positions. And so that's why I think that for those who believe that Thelema is apolitical, is that I see that as being a denial of the correlation between belief / values and political persuasion. But like I said earlier, I don't think that Thelema is inherently a libertarian philosophy, even though that it has elements of libertarian concepts within it. There are people on the alt-right who are Thelemites and who view Thelema from a alt-right, albeit conservative, perspective. There are those who view it from a liberal, progressive perspective. And the interesting thing is that I think that for those who are not necessarily born into the community, who aren't children of Thelemites, who haven't been exposed to this right off the bat, that when they come into Thelema, their preconceived notions of things are both challenged and should be challenged, but also given a different flavor. So that when I come from a very strong leftist persuasion, and when I came to Thelema, that persuasion, I saw that persuasion in Thelema. So what I'm saying is that within Thelema, philosophically, is that Thelema is meant for anyone, regardless of their persuasion. And that and if someone is looking for a specific justification of their political persuasion, then ultimately they will find it. Because with Thelema and with the Book of the Law, it's all about how you interpret it for yourself. Because according to Crowley and the main principle of Thelema is that the individual is the autarch. The individual is the sole authority over their own life. And so they have to be the ones to interpret the Book of the Law for themselves. To interpret how they incorporate the law of Thelema into their own life. And so, like I said, there are many different political persuasions, many different ways of looking at it. There are Thelemites who are pro-choice. There are Thelemites who are pro-life. And while there may be differences, even along ideological lines, the ultimate conclusion is that when it comes to Thelema, there is no right or wrong way to apply it to your life. The problem lies in when one group of people or one political persuasion tries to impose their political beliefs on another group. And to me, in my opinion, that violates the law of Thelema. I don't think that pro-choice people should impose that decision on pro-life people. And it kind of goes back to the meme where if you don't like abortion, don't get one. If you don't like guns, don't own one. But that doesn't necessarily stop people from imposing their will on other people. And that kind of goes into my own personal anarchist leanings, where I believe that the state acts as a function that allows one group to impose on another group. And so the state, by its inherent structure, is antithetical to what I believe is the point of Thelema, where no one has the right to impose on the will of another. And people are perfectly willing to interpret that or disagree with that however they like. Because, like I said in the disclaimer, this is not my opinion. This is my opinion. This isn't, I'm not the Thelemic Pope here. If your Thelema has to inform your politics, would you not then by proxy be imposing your Thelema on others? That's a very valid question. By voting, I guess I would be. But to me, the heart of Thelema is not about restriction, because the sole point of it's not about restriction, because in Thelema, sin, restriction is the ultimate sin. To me, Thelema, when you are imposing Thelema, in a sense, what you are ultimately doing is you are saying that everyone has the freedom to do as they will. So the underlying structure of Thelema is liberatory, is about freedom of the individual. And it's different there's a difference between promulgation and proselytizing. Even by definition, there is a difference. I think ultimately, that it's different than like how the United States government likes to spread democracy abroad by pointing a gun at people and saying, now you're a democracy. Thelema doesn't operate like that, in my opinion. From my perspective, Thelema is more about here's what it is. Here's what the law of Thelema is. And it's your choice to accept it or not, because it's your will, ultimately. And the reality is, and yes, I would say that by proxy, I'm imposing my will on other people. But I'm not doing it in a way that infringes or prevents them from living their life. I'm saying that I'm not telling a pro-lifer that I'm not forcing a pro-lifer to get an abortion. Okay? Any more than whereas pro-lifers are using the government to impose their sense of morality on people who are pro-choice, or people who are, people who have uteruses. That's the fundamental difference between what I'm imposing and what the other side is imposing, is that I'm not telling a pro-lifer that they have to get an abortion, whereas the pro-lifer is saying you can't in any way possible get one. And so that's the difference between my imposing and their imposing, is that to me it's about supporting liberty and the freedom of people to do as they will, whereas other people are trying to restrict, trying to control. And it's the same thing with drugs. You have people who still are obsessed with the war on drugs, who are against any form of medicinal or recreational marijuana, who are against any kind of the use of substance, regardless of what it is. And I would tell those people that you have every right you have the right by your will not to do marijuana, not to do cocaine, not to do heroin, not to do fentanyl, whatever whatever your devil or whatever you want to call it is, whatever you villain or evil that you see it as is. But I would also say to them that they don't have the right to tell someone else that they can't do X, Y, and Z. And so that's how I see the translation of the political translation of Thelema, is that it's inherently libertarian in a sense, anarchistic in some ways, progressive in others. For example, the nature of sex and sexual relations within Thelemic spiritual philosophy. It's the most, when it comes to that, it's more liberal than most liberals in the United States. There's still within the United States, there's a large hang-up, puritanical, purity culture bullshit, related to sex. Even with on the left, the inherent swerve mentality of sex work and exclusionism by professed radical feminists who are opposed to sex work, but at the same time, they equate sex work with human trafficking. But I would say that that is a very reductive definition of what sex work is, because not all examples of sex work are human trafficking. There are people who enjoy the work. There are people who are financially supported by the work. and who work very hard 24/7, 365. They're always doing something they're always on social media, always trying to reach their audience, expand their audience, get more people involved. And you have people on the left who want to limit their ability to work their occupation because they see it as solely human trafficking. And I see, and that's kind of the leftist view of purity culture, in a sense, is that they look at sex work in such a reductive way that they're willing to negate someone's economic stability because of their political principles. And in that sense, they are imposing their will on that other person. They are preventing that person from living their will. Because it's not harming anyone else. If they honestly choose that occupation, they aren't hurting anyone. They are living according to their will. What's the issue? And I see a clear distinction between human trafficking and sex work. That there are people who are victims of human trafficking who are being forced into that occupation. And I would say the vast majority are the case. But I would also say that there is also a substantial group who choose that occupation as well. And by making that distinction, I believe that that agencies, government agencies, whatever, what have you, will be much more capable of distinguishing between the two instead of criminalizing both. That's my take on that. But that also goes back to my Thelemic view on the nature of sexuality, that people should be allowed to express themselves sexually. Wouldn't imposing your will on someone be the same as imposing your Thelema on someone, though? Would it not be better to keep that out of politics? But like I said earlier, I don't believe you can separate your personal beliefs and values from your political persuasions, because one is the reflection of the other, ultimately. And that the difference between what I'm doing, my views, and the other person's views, is that my views, I want to let people be liberatory, be emancipated, to be able to follow their will without restriction, without limitation, outside of their responsibility to themselves and to other people, and preventing and not infringing on other people's rights to do the same. Whereas other groups want to limit, want to restrict, want to prevent other people from following their will. And to me, that is the difference. So it's not necessarily, while imposing, it might be a negation in the sense, a negative. It's what is the point of that imposing? What is the end goal? What is the point of it? The point of it is to correct. The point of it is to prevent people from imposing their will on others. Ultimately, restricting, limiting people from expressing themselves, from living according to their will. And that, to me, is the ultimate purpose. And I've heard some people say that, Crowley was fond of 20th century fascists. He had high praise for Hitler during one of his table talks and stuff like that. And I do not see that historical incident as being justification for alt-right expression. Now, that said, that's just my opinion. But to me, like I said earlier, I don't think the point of Thelema is to emulate Crowley or to follow Crowley. The point of Thelema is to follow one's true will. And that will is expressed in our own beliefs and our own values and our own political persuasions. I didn't shave my head because I wanted to look like Crowley. I shaved my head because I wanted to shave my head. I wanted to experience it once in my life, to know what it was like not to have hair, or have minimal hair, I should say. It wasn't about emulation. It's about doing your true will, doing what best defines you, your potential, your nature, and following that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you get to do whatever you want, damn the consequences. Because, like Jack Parsons said, in Freedom is a double-edged sword. He said that the swords, the twin blades of the sword, one side is freedom, the other side is responsibility. And while we have the freedom to do our will, we also have the responsibility both to ourselves and to the rest of society. And that should be reflective of our Thelemic values, in promoting the ability of people to follow their true will, to create an environment in which in which we strive for the free development of all people. And I also think that, in my opinion, and I'm going to keep saying that is to emphasize this, so that way I don't have people, when this video, goes on YouTube or whatever, coming at me, claiming that, I'm trying to be the Thelemic Pope here. This is just my interpretation of things. So, but I think that ultimately Thelemites should also be supportive of trans rights. They should be in favor of any LGBTQ plus whatever rights, in my opinion. Because ultimately, the sexual expression of the individual is reflective of their true will. And to deny someone the ability to express themselves sexually because you don't agree with their sexual or their sexual preference or their gender identity is antithetical to the law of Thelema, because you are in turn saying that their will doesn't matter. And it kind of goes back to a quote from the anarchist Mikhail Bakunin, who said that the freedom of all is essential to my freedom. And that is the one, and to me, that's the catalyst, ultimately, of Thelemic values, is that we should support freedom in such a way that we should create an environment where people can express themselves and develop themselves according to their values, according to their will. And that we have no more right to impose on other people than they have right to impose on us. And so I think, ultimately, yes, Thelemites should support trans rights, and they should not they should not take exclusionary positions any more than I think Thelemites should embrace fascism. Because if you look at the history of Thelema, you will, fascists actively persecuted Thelemites. Karl Germer was in a concentration camp during World War II. So regardless of Aleister Crowley's, persuasions, the philosophy of fascism is directly opposed to the law of Thelema. They want uniformity, they want conformity. They don't want people capable. Yes, you are right. Mussolini did deport Aleister Crowley and his Abbey of Thelema out of Cefalù because of the yellow journalists creating a huge scandal, and also a disgruntled widow of a former member who made accusations about human and animal sacrifice, and saying that her partner was died from drinking the blood of a cat, which is actually not true. He died from drinking contaminated water, which is a vast difference. But anyways, so yes, like I said, the philosophy of fascism is directly opposed to the law of Thelema, because, like I said, they want uniformity, they want conformity, they want people to be these cookie cutter presentations of what they deem society should be. Now, the difference between what I'm imposing and what they're imposing is, I'm saying people should be allowed to follow their own will. I'm saying people should be allowed to express themselves however they like, so long as it doesn't stop anyone else from doing the same. What the fascists are saying is that we want you to only do this specific thing. We only want you to dress this specific way. It's like North Korea. They have only 18 different haircuts. They create these societal standards, and it's no different than the United States. With these societal standards, the purity culture, especially within the evangelical movement, they look at other gods like, they see Muslims as worshiping Satan, because they don't believe the way they do, and Protestants and Catholics and all that bullshit. Do you believe in God? Yes, I believe in God. Do you believe in my God? No, you're dead. And that's the bottom line there. Is that it's about control. It's about coercion and force and ultimately violence. What I'm saying is that the Thelemic nature, or the Thelemic values, are about promoting freedom, promoting individuality, promoting the free expression of all people. And that, in turn, those values being promoted in a political dialogue. And like I said, our Thelemic values should reflect our political values, not the other way around. But if anyone has any questions, I think I feel like I said all I was going to say on this issue. I mean, I can probably think of some more things. But ultimately, I think I've said the same stuff over and over a few times. I'm sorry for repeating myself. I wasn't sure if I was getting my point across as articulate as I wanted it to. But that said, I'm gonna. What are your guys' thoughts on Thelemic values and politics? And let me know in the comments what you think. And I appreciate it. I'm glad you agree with me. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks that way. But like I said, everyone people can disagree with me. I'm like I said, I'm not the Thelemic Pope, and I would never assume to think I am in some kind of position of leadership to be saying, well, you should only believe this way. I'm saying you have every right to believe the way you want to believe and practice Thelema the way you want to practice it. Because ultimately that is the only thing that's important, is your own experiences within your spiritual practice and how you apply it to your life and into your community. Because ultimately, while we are individual stars within the body of Nuit, we are clustered together. We are all clustered together within this body. And while we may operate within our own orbits, it is our responsibility as Thelemites, and I believe this, you don't have to believe it, but I believe this, that ultimately it is our responsibility to create an environment where everyone is able to freely develop according to their own will. And that is, to me, the ultimate purpose. And that is, to me, an aspect of the great work. Is that while the great work may start with myself, I want to create an environment for people who are capable of also, in turn, being able to do what I'm doing. Being able to express themselves as I'm expressing it. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom, and it goes back to what George Carlin said at the end of one of his shows. He said, "I either believe we have unlimited rights or we have no rights at all." And I believe, I lean more towards, I believe we have unlimited rights. Except for the right to limit or restrict anyone else. I believe we have the right to express ourselves however we wish. We have the right to, travel the world and experience the world in its totality and not be limited by borders or by governments. That ultimately the sole authority over your life is you. And with that, I am going to end this episode. I wish you all the very best in your lives. Love is the law. Actually, let me start that over. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Love is the law. 156:93.